We're having two public lectures actually today, and it's called Bottleneck to Break Through Urbanization and the Future of Biodiversity Conservation, and What to Do with Tigers in Conflict, Returning Tigers to the Wild. First of all, I would like to thank you all for coming here today and willing to spend a little bit of your time to learn something new here together. My name is Rifa. I'm from Wildlife Conservation Society, and I will be your MC today. So we have an inspiring and visionary panel here, and we're actually going to learn about two different topics here today. And Dr. Eric Sanderson from WCS New York will be talking about how the key to conserving biodiversity in the future might just be closer to us than we thought. And I mean, who would have guessed that cities, along with urbanization, could help the future retaliation of biodiversity in ways we thought would not be possible. And Dr. Dale Mikel here from the WCS Russia program will be talking about what we should do with tigers in conflict. And WCS Russia have implemented internationally recognized and longest running field research program for Amur tigers. And they have established successful rehabilitation and reintroduction programs for conflict tigers in Russia. So now to start our proceedings, let's hear a few words first from the Vice Dean of Faculty of Mathematics and Natural Science, Dr. Joko Triyono. The stage is yours.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Dear colleagues of Faculty of Mathematics and Natural Sciences, Universitas Indonesia, honorable speakers, Dr. Dale and Dr. Eric, and also our distinguished speaker, our moderator, Dr. Didi, yes, I think call it, and also Pak Sunaryo and the others. Welcome to our faculty. Yeah. Allow me to start by sending you all a warmest greeting and welcoming to this public lecture in Universitas Indonesia. I am very grateful for the experts that have come here despite their busy schedule and willing to share their valuable speech with us. To our eminent speakers, I give you a very warm welcome to Indonesia. Please allow me to express my sincere appreciation for Dr. Eric Sanderson and Dr. Dale Mikel. We are indeed honored to have you here with us. I am very encouraged to see the enthusiasm shown by the participant for this event. I would imagine differently a few years ago. This proves that biodiversity conservation has become an important subject. This public lecture will discuss in detail the transformation of Bottleneck theory into a breakthrough recovery, as well as effective conflict mitigation and rehabilitation program for tiger population. We hope that with this event, young generation will comprehend the impact of urbanization toward the biodiversity conservation in the future, and encourage participants to actively take part in the interesting discussion. I wish everyone a successful and fruitful event and stimulating discussion. Finally, I would like to congratulate the committee for their tremendous effort in organizing this event, especially for the ISER, Institute for Sustainable Earth and Resources, and also for the WCS Indonesia, led by the Dr. Novia Handayani. Thank you very much.
Now everyone, please pay attention. I'd like to remind you all to silence your phones so as to not disturb the speaker during the event. And please feel free to go to the restroom now so that you wouldn't miss anything exciting after we start. Or if you want to fill up your tumbler, there's water outside. So as our moderator today, we have Dr. Muhammad Ibrahim, MSc, or widely known as Dr. BG. He's currently a research scientist for Research Center for Climate Change at FMIPA UI. He's a field biologist turned amateur anthropologist with almost 3 decades of volunteer and research work in Central Sulawesi. For his work and contribution, he was awarded with Kalpataru, the President's Award for Environmental Leadership under the Capacity Builder category. And with his long academic and practical background, He's a member of 2 IUCN specialist groups, World Commission on Protected Areas and Bird Redlist Authority. Without further ado, let's please join me in welcoming Pak Didi to the stage.
Thank you so much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam sejahtera buat kita semua. Om Swastiastu, Nama Budaya. We are very grateful to WCS, Ibu Yani and the team for their cooperation with ISAT. ISAT is Institute for Sustainable Earth and Resources under the Faculty of Mathematics and Sciences for inviting our 2 distinguished speakers. And on this note, I also would like to thank very much all the WCS team and Ibu Nurul, Ibu Maya, and the team from ISAT. And I would like to invite the 2 speakers to come aboard, please. So I'd like to consider this is a great opportunity to look at the research in the age of extinction, because we have to have that sense of crisis and we have to do something as researchers. People think that researchers just collect data, analyze and publish, but our 2 resource persons will prove it is not always the case. So with many thanks, we have Dr. Eric Sanderson, who is expert on urban ecology, 20 years in historical ecology, and even he can go back in time, looking at how the city of Manhattan changed in the past and how it can be in the future. So this is futuristic abilities, kind of superpower, yeah. But the other one, Dr. Dale Miguel, is that correct? Yeah, thank you. Dr. Miguel is also a hero of his own 25 years in a very cold tundra in Alaska and trying to tame the tigers and returning them to the wild. So this is a story, returning tigers to the wild, a story that very instructive for us. We have our own tiger experts, world class, and they work in the very thick rainforest, very difficult condition. Unfortunately, they are not here, but it's okay. We will take notes and pass your notes of your thought to them. So, yeah. Without further ado, do I need to read over your CV, or I think it is the song, not the singer, and you will find out that the singer is excellent once you hear the song. So, please, Dr. Sanderson.
It's wonderful to be here at the University of Indonesia and to be in Jakarta and have such a friendly welcome. So thank you so much for having us here. And I won't be singing, but I will give you a talk. You don't want to want me to sing. Okay. So yeah, if you could bring up the first slide, please. So I'm going to give my talk, and then Dale's going to talk about tigers in Russia, and then we'll have a discussion afterwards. So we're very interested in the discussion and the questions you have, and your comments about what we're going to talk about. Okay. So both Dale and I work for the Wildlife Conservation Society, which is a global wildlife conservation organization based out of New York City. WCS works in 60 countries around the world, including here in Indonesia, which is one of our largest most important programs across the whole world. My job at WCS is to, in some part, to help us think about the big picture of conservation. And so with my colleagues, Joe Walston and John Robinson from WCS, we wrote a paper that came out in Bioscience on Earth Day last year called From Bottleneck to Breakthrough, the Future of Urbanization and Biodiversity Conservation. And this paper is really trying to help the conservation community think about the next 100 years of our work. What will the world look like at the end of the century? You know, by the time all of you are my age and you have a gray beard like me, what will that world be like? And what kinds of wildlife and ecosystems will be here with us? So my talk has 4 parts, and the first part is this part about the bottleneck. So we all know we live in a very crowded world. And in that very crowded world, we use a lot of stuff. And all these things that we use, our clothes, our food, our energy, the materials we use to build our buildings, increasingly comes through cities, through the great cities of the world. Both large megalopolises like Jakarta, as well as smaller cities and towns all over the world. And to build these cities, we've had to take a lot of resources out of nature. In fact, on an annual basis, humanity uses more than 50% of the productivity of nature to satisfy our economies. And that has required the transformation of landscapes. This is a picture from Germany, and this is a forest. This landscape used to be a forest. It's not a forest anymore. It's been transformed for agriculture, for housing, for energy production. And we know in the process of doing this, mostly without intention, that we've created so much pollution that we've changed the atmosphere, right? We're actually causing global climate change, global warming. And that's going to have serious ramifications, not just for wildlife, but for people too. Many scientists believe we're undercutting the very ecological foundations of life on Earth for human beings and for other species. Let's put the right direction, please. Could be the next slide. Thank you. And this has come to home very directly for us at the Wildlife Conservation Society. In addition to our global conservation work, we run 5 zoological parks, zoos, and an aquarium in New York City. And this is the New York Aquarium the day after Hurricane Sandy in 2012. And it flooded the aquarium. It's cost us over $300 million to repair the damage that came from Hurricane Sandy, a storm that many people believe is much larger and much more powerful because of climate change. And so, you know, there are tolls that have come from this damage that affect us in all kinds of ways. Some of them are about our physical safety and security, some of them are about our economic welfare, and some of them are about our moral status. What does it mean to be a human being on Earth? And to be a human being that lives in a society that can destroy something as beautiful as this elephant that was poached in Mozambique. Some conservationists believe that we're living through hell on Earth right now, that we're destroying, you know, the fundamental underpinnings of the planet. I personally don't think, I think we're at a very harsh time, that we're in the midst of a really deep bottleneck, deep pressures on nature. But I think if we do the right things now, and particularly the right things in our generation is the key time, the key opportunity to reverse these trends and actually create a much more optimistic future, both for people and for the rest of nature. And that's what I want to talk to you about today. Some of my work has been making maps of human influence globally. This is the map that we call the human footprint. And it shows all the places on the world that are influenced by human beings. And when we did the first version of this map in the early 2000s, we found that 83% of the planet was influenced by human beings. And 98% of the places where it's possible to grow rice, wheat, and corn, the major crop commodities, were influenced by human beings, as you can see here. The green areas are the wild places in the world, the less influenced places. And the reds and purples and blacks are the more influenced places. 3 years ago, working with some colleagues, we made a new mapping of the human footprint so that we could compare the human footprint in 2009, which you see on this map, the upper map, to what it was back in 1993. And you can see this map on the bottom shows areas where the human footprint has changed between 1993 and 2009. So red areas are where the human footprint increased, yellow areas are where it's mostly the same, and green areas where it's actually gone down. And I have to say we were somewhat surprised. We thought human influence would have increased uniformly all across the world. But in fact, you can see that human influence has increased more in the tropics than in the temperate latitudes over that period of time. And I imagine probably all of you have seen this in Indonesia in particular. We compared the rate of growth in human influence and human footprint to the growth in population. That's what you see in the top here. In 1993, there were 5.5 billion people on Earth. In 2009, there were 6.8 billion people. So in that 16-year period, humanity added more than 1 billion people to the planet, a 23% increase. In 1993, the size of the economy globally was about $33 trillion. Adjusting for inflation, in 2009, it was over almost $82 trillion, a growth of 153%. So these are enormous changes, right? Enormous growth in the population, enormous growth in the economy, and yet the human influence went up about 9%. 9%. I was actually quite surprised by that. You would think, given how much the population has grown and the economy has grown, that human influence on nature would have grown in a sort of proportional way, but in fact it's not as much. Why is that? We made maps, which you can see for all the countries of the world. This is the one from Indonesia. I don't know if you write down that URL, you can look up other countries. So you can see the human footprint in Indonesia in 1993 and in 2009, and then you can see here the change. And you can see, of course, that Indonesia, the human footprint has increased a lot. When we look at Sumatra here, no wonder the Sumatran tiger is having troubles, right? I don't know if you can read this table, but it shows that the human influence in Indonesia increased 35% over that period, but the human population went up 25%, and the economy grew 241%. So just think about that. Think of those dramatic changes that have happened just between 1993 and 2009. We did an analysis to try and figure out what are the factors most important for explaining why some countries have an increase in human influence and some have a decrease in human influence for the economies that are growing fastest in the world. And that's what's shown in this graph here. And you can see the two factors that were most important were urbanization and control of corruption. If countries that urbanize more and control corruption, that have more transparent and fair governance, they had decreased human footprints versus countries that had increased human footprints. So that made us think really hard. So these are the factors that are most important, because if human influence is leading to threats to nature, understanding urbanization and control of corruption is therefore part of conservation. That led to this theory about the breakthrough. We ask ourselves, well, what are the conditions for lasting biodiversity conservation? What's going to make biodiversity conservation work? And a lot of times in conservation, we think about, well, what do the tigers need? What do the elephants need? What do the ecosystems need? Why does the climate work like it does? But in fact, tigers are tigers, and elephants are elephants. What actually changes the conservation situation is what human beings do. And so, if we think in the long term, what are the conditions of the human enterprise, of humanity, They're going to lead to the possibility for nature surviving and restoring and supporting our lives. And we think these are the three most important factors. One, that the human population needs to stabilize. If the human population always grows, then it suggests that our demand for natural resources will always grow. But if there's a possibility of stabilization, that creates an opportunity for us to have nature and to have good lives as people as well. Second, we need to eradicate poverty, right? If you're poor, then there's really no question. If you're poor and there are resources to be had, you're going to go and get those to satisfy yourself and your family, right? It's really hard to make any other decision. And it's really hard to criticize anybody for making that decision. So we have to see the end of extreme poverty. And third, we need to organize our societies in a way that they operate to restore nature, not destroy it. And the thing that is most surprising to us about the breakthrough theory is that all three of these are on their way to coming to pass. Global population stabilization in our lifetimes, the end of extreme poverty, and the dedication of society to conserve nature. And how are we going to achieve those? Through towns and cities, through working through places like Jakarta, by working through Bogor, by working through all the towns and cities across all of Indonesia, while at the same time making sure that we hold on to the pieces of nature that are still left. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about these. So this idea about population stabilization, where is that coming from? These are three graphs that show future projections of population on Earth. This first one is based on data from the World Bank, and what it's showing here is between 1960 and 2015, the annual population growth rate globally. And you can see that the population growth rate peaked in about 1967, about 2.1% per year on average. And it's been decreasing ever since. It's about 1.2%. So the global population is still growing, but it's growing more slowly every year. Does that make sense? So it's still growing, but the rate of population growth is actually going down. It's not going up. And because of that, when demographers make projections into the future, as you can see here on this graph, these are projections from the United Nations of the population from 1950 through 2100. And you can see this version and this version, they start to bend. The curves actually start to bend. This graph here is what's called a medium variant. This is what you hear in the newspapers or from the United Nations about when people say the population in 2100 will be 9 billion people, that's what they mean. But nobody actually knows what the population will be. It depends a lot on what people do and what society does. This variant is called the low variant, and if population fertility goes down a little bit over that period of time, then we'll have a lower population by the end of the century. And that's called the high variant. That's just a little bit higher more. These are 5 projections that are called the Shared Socioeconomic Pathways, the SSPs, done by a group at YASA, which is an Austrian research institute. And you can see again that these curves turn, right? That this is called the demographic transition. In the demographic community, people no longer debate whether the human population will stabilize. What they discuss is when will it stabilize? Will it stabilize in 2065 or 2080 or 2100? That's hugely important. The human population has been growing for the last 10,000 years. And it's been growing tremendously fast for the last 250 years. We maybe have another 10, 20, 30, 40 years of population growth, but then it'll stop. This is the theory of the demographic transition, which if those of you who work in sociology or economics may have heard of this, or those of you who study environmental science might have heard of this, or geography. It's the theory that before development, in societies all across the world, the death rate and the death rate and the birth rate were both very high, on the order of about 40 people per 1,000 people. So every year in these societies, about 40 people per 1,000 would die, and and 40 would be born. And most of the people that would die were young kids. They were infants, infant mortality, and child mortality. And this, for most of human history has been the case. That people, people had babies and those babies died, and it was really sad and tragic. And because of that, people had more babies. Humanity developed ways to have larger families as a way of compensating for this terrible toll that infant mortality took. But with the development of modern medicine and modern public hygiene, starting in the 19th century in Europe and then spreading all around the world, what you see here is how the death rate started to go down. And so there's this period called the second stage of the demographic transition, where the birth rate is still high, but the death rate is coming down. And what that causes is the population to go up, and to go up very, very quickly, right? Because that gap between fertility and mortality is what drives population growth. There's this third stage of the demographic transition where fertility starts to come down, to come closer to mortality. This is called the fertility transition. And it's again something that that are observed by demographers in all societies around the world. Once people realize that they don't have to have so many kids to try and keep up with mortality, they choose through a whole variety of different mechanisms to have fewer kids. And eventually, you get down towards stability. And in some cases, what actually reverses, where fertility is below the death rate, as in Japan right now, or Portugal, or certain parts of Eastern Europe. And even in countries like the United States, where the United States is in this sort of fourth stage of the demographic transition, where basically mortality and fertility are in pace with each other. The US population only grows through immigration, which is why we have all these politics around our immigration policy. It's only in the last sort of 10 to 15 years that demographers understood what really drives this process. And what's so interesting about it is how it's involved with cities, with the urban lifestyle. That in general, if you look again across societies and across time, urban people tend to have fewer kids than rural people. And there's several related reasons for this. There isn't one reason, and it doesn't need to be one reason. It can be a whole collaborative. I tend to think of it as like a catalyst, like the way enzymes catalyze processes in our cells. They make them go faster without using them up. Cities are sort of catalysts for the demographic transition. And these are the kinds of reasons that, when people move to cities, in general, they have better access to health care and better access to family planning services. They have lower child mortality as a result of having better health care. People in cities tend to make more income. They have better income. They have more money because there's higher productivity. And that translates into making different decisions. People choose to get more education. And then education means that people choose to have kids later in life. It also means that women have more power in cities and more choices about their fertility behavior. So then they in some cases, have fewer kids. There are higher costs of raising children in cities. But the compensating thing is that your child is better, if you raise your child in a city, you're more likely for that child to grow to be an adult and to have the benefits of education and economic development that then allow them to live better lives themselves. This is why people move to cities all over the world. And you can see this in the data. I mean, this is what's been very compelling to me, is if you look at these graphs, there's 6 graphs here. They all have the same x-axis, which is urbanization of the population. These different colored lines represent different regions of the world. So these are taking the countries of the world and averaging them together. The blue line is the East Asian Pacific line, which would include Indonesia. And then this top 3 panels are all demographic factors. This graph here, number A, is the crude death rate compared to urbanization. And all these data are from 1960 to 2015. And you can see that as countries since 1960 have urbanized, that the death rate has gone down. It comes down really fast. And again, these are all regions of the world. So this isn't just a Western phenomena or an Eastern phenomena. It's not a developing world phenomena or a developed world phenomena. It's a phenomena true for all countries of the world. You can see also the fertility rate goes down, the crude birth rate. And as a result, the population growth rate also comes down. And you can even see how the demographic transition works. So you see how the curves drop a little bit faster with urbanization right here for the death rate and the fertility rate. And that's what creates the bump in population growth rate and then the decline in the population growth rate. So cities in general, especially well-functioning cities, are hugely important to the demographic transition. The better our cities work, the faster the demographic transition happens. So now let me make a few comments about poverty alleviation, because poverty is actually something that's also changing tremendously. You know, in the news, we spend a lot of time talking about people at the very high end of the income distribution, and there's a lot to be said about that, and how much the very wealthy in our societies their wealth has grown. But it's also true that at the very low end, there's been a lot of changes in the income of the very poorest in our societies, again, all across the world. And that's shown on this graph here. Again, comparing different regions of the world. These graphs from the World Bank are showing the number of extremely poor people in the world, people living on less than $1.90 per day per person. So these are the poorest of the poor, what the UN calls extreme poverty. These are people that, you know, if there's a storm or a flood or, you know, a crop failure, you know, are literally threatened with starvation. So, you know, which is a terrible, terrible thing to imagine. But you can see how much extreme poverty has dropped, again, in all regions of the world. Sub-Saharan Africa is where most of the poverty is still located. But you can see these tremendous changes just since 1990, right? Again, over a very short period of time, the end of the 20th century, the early part of the 21st century. And that's what's shown on these graphs, these bottom three graphs here. Again, urbanization on the x-axis, and you can see that as countries urbanize, the income per capita, the GDP per capita goes up, right? The numbers of extremely poor come crashing down, and the amount of education per person goes up, right? So urbanization is not only a catalyst for the demographic transition, it's also the best tool we have to eradicate poverty. And that's because of the economic benefits of cities. So if you go over to the economic faculty, I'll bet there are people that are studying urban economics here at the university. It's a huge area in economics. Why are cities so productive? And there's a number of really good reasons for this. Urbanization drives economic growth. It concentrates workers in firms. It increases worker productivity. Workers who live in cities have better access to capital and to the tools that allow them to be more productive. You have these what are called agglomeration effects of living in denser settings, which create economies of scale, that create specialization and diversification of markets, that creates new opportunities. And there's lower infrastructure per person on a per person basis. That sewer line, that road, that subway line, they're all going to be more productive the higher the density is. So that makes them more efficient. Even though they're expensive to build, they actually serve more people, so they become more efficient on a per capita basis. And cities are famous all over the world for innovation and for learning. All the great ideas of Western civilization of all kinds, have come from cities, have come from urban settings, including conservation for that matter. It's no wonder that the Wildlife Conservation Society started out life as the New York Zoological Society, at a time where New York had become a great city of the world and had the resources and the concern for what was happening in nature, and that then founded an institution to try and make a difference about that. And that institution is why the WCS Indonesia program is here, and Dale and I are here. So urbanization is happening again at a remarkable pace on a global scale. It's the #1 land use trend of the 20th century, and it will be the #1 land use trend of the 21st century. And again, you see that here for all regions of the world, globally, regionally, developing countries, developed countries, they're all moving towards urbanization. The UN had an important report in 2007 that suggested that more than half the world's population were living in cities, in towns and cities, rather than rural areas. And that was the first time in the entire history of humanity that more people lived in urban areas than rural areas. And that happened in 2007, right? I mean, these things are such remarkable phenomena, and it really suggests why our world seems so uncertain and transformative and exciting all at the same time. And they explain why there's so much pressure on nature. So why do people urbanize? Why do people move to town? Well, there are a number of reasons for this. People move for better jobs, for better futures for themselves and for their kids, for better education, for more income. They don't move for nature necessarily, but the argument is that actually this will actually create the conditions that allow nature to survive for the long term. And not just survive, but perhaps even thrive in a way that we haven't seen for centuries. And I want to say, I want to acknowledge that for a lot of people, they're moving from rural poverty to urban poverty and living in these tremendous slums, which I know are also here, on the edges of Jakarta. It's true across the world. And there are terrible things to look at, terrible things to experience. And you have to ask yourself, why would someone do that? And the reason is because they want hope. They want hope for themselves and for their kids. It's the same reason that my impoverished ancestors moved from Ireland and Holland to the United States in the 19th century, and then lived in slums in New York City, and then eventually moved west and had more land, and eventually, I was able to get an education, and then with my education, be able to do the kind of work that I do, right? This is the process. This is the process. And the thing about slums is we know how to fix this. This doesn't have to be the situation. Better infrastructure and transparent governance, urban planning is the solution for slum development. So this graph, which is the first figure in our paper, tries to summarize these three, what we think are just completely earth-shattering trends, such enormous trends that have everything to do with almost every aspect of our lives here in the early 21st century. So these three graphs have the x-axis is from 1800 to 2200, so a 400-year period, so a very long period of time. And you can see how tremendously the population has grown over the last 250 years. And then these are three projections. These are the UN's long-term projections. This is their medium variant, which says that by the end of the century, the whole world has the fertility and mortality characteristics of the developed world, and then it just stays there. And so you can see, in that variant, the population bounces around 9 billion forever. But if on average, women have a half a child less over the course of their lifetimes, on average across everybody, then you get this low variant here. And the low variant, if you run it out over time, leads to a world by 2300 of 2.3 billion people. 2.3 billion people, right? The high variant, which is a half a child more per woman on average, leads to 36 billion people. Nobody thinks this will happen. The question is it this or somewhere in between? But I would argue that that's a situation that we can manage to work for humanity and for nature. These are the projections about extreme poverty, which you can see is just like throwing a rock off a cliff. If you go back 200 years, more than 80% of the world population lived at the level of extreme poverty, right? We're extremely poor. Where the next storm or the next bad event could throw your family, could lead to starvation. And now, even though the population's grown so tremendously, it's around 6%. Some people think that extreme poverty could be eradicated by 2030 or by 2050, like within the next few decades. That there would be no extremely poor people anywhere in the world. I mean, that would be enormous. That would be a huge success for humanity. And then this is the urbanization graph. So these two, nobody knows what the bottom is or the top of this one is, but this one, the best you can ever get is 80%. But many people think that by the end of the century, 70 to 80% of humanity will live in towns and cities around the world. So not everyone, but most of everyone. Okay, so could you forward it? 10 minutes? Okay, thank you. So let me talk about how urbanization fits into this. So this is the framework we present in our paper. So we all know that the combination of population and per capita consumption drives total consumption, how much resources we use. But based on the argument I've just given you, urbanization helps decrease fertility through the fertility transition. At the same time, it increases income. So, you know, urbanization is this double-edged sword where people have more money, and if they have more money, then they consume more. But if they urbanize, they also tend to have fewer kids. So there's sort of this competition about the population effect and the per capita consumption rate effect on total consumption. And of course, total consumption is what drives both natural resource extraction and pollution, which is bad for nature, right? So, you know, if we want to work to make this whole system work for everybody, then we need population stabilization and we need to work on the consumption rate down here. These four graphs try and give you a sense of that relationship over time. So here's the demographic transition. This is the graph of income per person and consumption per capita. And you know, a lot of people, especially a lot of people in conservation, think that this line is always linear, it goes up. The richer people always necessarily consume more as they have more income. But in fact, most economists will tell you the graph looks something like this. So that when you're very poor, of course, you know, when you get that next piece of income, you're going to spend it, the next bit of money. Because if you're really poor, the way you get out of poverty is by spending a little bit more money to have better houses and better foods and so forth. But as you get more wealth, then you have other things to do with your money. So this is a graph of what's called the marginal propensity to consume. And most economists believe that as you have more income, your marginal propensity to consume goes down. You might save your money, you might defer your consumption till later in your life, you might choose to spend more time with your family and on vacation instead of working so hard. You may choose to use your money in other ways. You might give some of your money to conservation or support other charities, for example. The other important thing to realize is that as economies urbanize, the sort of locus of the sort of focus of who's doing natural resource extraction changes. So if you're a not very urban society, then mostly people are in rural areas and they're the ones who are consuming natural resources, right? You know, if you're poor, if you're living in a rural place, if you need water, you go and get your water, right? You go to the stream and get your water. If you need firewood, you go and get your own firewood. If you need to build a house, you go and get the resources to build your house. But as we urbanize, the market becomes more important. You know, most of us don't build our own houses. We hire someone to build a house, or we rent from somebody who hired someone to build the house. We go to the grocery store to get our food. You know, we pay the water bill to get our water from. So what that means is that as you urbanize, the market becomes more important. And what's important about the market is the prices. So do the prices include the effects of the environmental destruction that happen because of your consumption? So we think that the combination of these three graphs, particularly if there's policies that help encourage this phenomena and that take advantage of the market supply, that we get this period where the environmental impact is increasing over time, and then we'll start to level off, and then could actually go down in the future, say toward the end of the 21st century and into the 22nd century, the time when your kids and your grandkids will be living. That's what we need to be working for now, is to create that bottleneck, create the conditions for that bottleneck for the future. One of the things that's going to help us is it turns out that if you look at the resource consumption per capita in cities, it's less than in rural areas. So these are three graphs from my part of the world comparing the consumption of an average American with an average New Yorker. And you can see the average New Yorker uses 74% less water than the average American on a daily basis, on a per person basis. They also use less electricity and create less garbage. If you go around New York City, you wouldn't necessarily feel like that because you see how much water is actually being used and how much electricity, right? You see these massive power plants and the wires bringing electricity in the city. You see big, huge piles of garbage on the sidewalk. But if you actually do it on a per capita basis, if you take the amount of trash and you average it by the number of people, it's actually less than in rural areas, right? The per capita effects are less. And that's the one that matters for long-term conservation. So this is sometimes called the green metropolis effect. It's the idea that, in a way, the best thing any of us could do for conservation is to move to the city, right? And even though you may like the city or you may not like the city, but you're probably going to use less resources when you're living in the city, even though your quality of life will be higher. So cities and conservation, so there are pros and there are cons, as in all things. On the pro side, I would argue that cities lead to population stabilization, they reduce extreme poverty, they concentrate people together, and that means that they have lower per capita consumptions, particularly if you adjust for income. They generate a lot of power and wealth, and I know that that power and wealth is not equitably distributed, so that also needs to be part of the conversation. But maybe even the most important fact is that cities are incubators of social change. They're places where new ideas can take root and take hold, ideas like conservation. On the con side, we all see this, as cities grow out on their edges, they displace agriculture and habitat. And it's hard for urban nature, for the rest of nature to live in the midst of our cities unless we specifically plan for it. They concentrate natural resource use and waste, which is why it's important to have good government to deal with those issues. They increase consumption because people have more money, and they displace the effects through the market. So it's actually harder to see the environmental effects any of us have because in general they're happening somewhere far away and through the marketplace, right? We buy our bananas in the grocery store, and we don't necessarily see the farm field that then took habitat from the tiger or whatever it is to make those bananas possible. They're great drivers of inequity, and this is again something that needs to be addressed. And I would also put on the con side that they're incubators of social change. So to the extent that there are pressures, political pressures, social pressures on society, they tend to manifest themselves in cities. And that can lead to terrible things as well as to positive things. So cities and conservation have to work together. That's the sort of overall message of our work. If you want to see conservation and nature in the world, we also have to make cities work. In the same way that Dale works every day to try and make better tiger habitat so tigers can live, we need to work every day to make better habitat for people so people can live and do well. So there are 5 implications for conservation. That's it. Thank you. I'm almost done. So, first we need to protect the wild. We live in a time where, we could very easily see, species like rhinos go extinct, or species like tigers or elephants in our time. So we need to create the protected areas and the legal structures to protect these species and limit the threats to them. But in the future, we have to see those new protected areas as places where they become source sites. They become the seeds of nature that will allow nature to expand again. We need to enable free movement. So there's a lot of our conservation that's about supporting rural livelihoods. And in some cases that's right and that's good and that's the best thing for conservation. But there are other cases where the best thing for the people might be to move to town. And so conservation needs to work very consciously and think very hard about the way that it's creating conditions for the choices that people make. And what I would say is we should facilitate choice. We should give people, every person on earth, the choice to make the best decisions for themselves and for their families. Third, you won't be surprised to hear me say we need to urbanize well. So urban planning needs to be part of conservation. Conservation organizations don't need to do it, but we need to support the other parts of society that are doing this well. Then that means good housing, good transportation, good environmental policy, good economic policy, and more important than anything else is really good governance. You have to trust your government to do the right thing, and that means government needs to be honest and transparent and open to change. We need to pay down the destruction we've created. So we've built these economies as if nature were free, and nature isn't free. And so we need to build in the costs of the destruction we make. Things like carbon taxes, land use taxes, externality taxes, and incentives for the right behavior need to be part of our economy. They need to be part of every decision we make. Because most decisions are made through economics, right? So the prices really do matter a lot. We need to lead a renaissance for nature. this is probably the most important thing that each of us can do, talking to our friends, talking to our families. We need to inspire people to care for nature, and as nature becomes restored, it will inspire us. It will feed our creativity and our moral value and our characters as human beings on Earth. There's a new renaissance for nature coming, and it's in our hands to foster it and to create it. Okay, so sometimes it feels like we're in a dark tunnel, and there's maybe a light glimmering at the end of the tunnel. And I know that's a really hard place to be, and it's the challenge of our generation. And sometimes it feels like all that society offers us is just another opportunity to buy something, right? Just another night out at the mall. And in the process, we're paving over paradise. And I think that's undercutting our values as human beings and our values as human society. And moreover, there's such pressures in modern life that it means that sometimes it's hard to have a perspective that's beyond what's immediately in front of us, between how am I going to get to work today, how are my kids going to get to school, am I going to have enough money to retire on. Some of us are so, almost everyone is so focused on near-term needs that it's really hard to have a long-term perspective, to actually see the sort of grand sweep of how history is changing our world. And so, if I could ask you to do anything today, it would be to go spend a little bit of time in nature. Whether that's just a city park or the forest here on campus, or whether it's going and visiting one of the amazing national parks here in Indonesia. But it's only through our connection to nature that we see our connection to the long history on Earth, and to this tremendous diversity and abundance that this planet provides to us. And not just to us, but to all of the other creatures that we share this Earth with, and that we have an obligation to create a world that's good for them as well as good for us. And that's the way we think of our work at the Wildlife Conservation Society. We're of course not the only ones doing this, and we can't do it alone, but we're trying to keep this bottleneck open just wide enough so that tigers and elephants and orangutans and other creatures get through to this future that we think could be tremendously wonderful for all kinds of animals all across the planet, for ecosystems and for nature overall, and for people too. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I will not summarize, but I'm asking your permissions. Is it okay just we go straight to the second speaker about returning tigers to the wild, and after that we will have a very brief summaries and discussion. So please welcome Dr. Del Miguel. I will be brief. Please let me summarize as quickly as possible. Firstly, about this very romantic Cinderella story, really inspiring success story. It begins with reality that you also presented, reality that human and wildlife has to coexist. And then we were taken aback and very sad that the cubs, including Philippa's siblings, they are hit by motor cars. What you did is very remarkable because you did this in very intricate, from habituation to soft release to conditions for release. In Indonesia, we have good expertise with orangutan, and the release of gibbon. We have tiger experts, Dr. Sunarto and Dr. Haryo Tabah. Unfortunately, they are not here at the moment, but I will take note and give this to them. What you said about indicators of success is very important because we have to know when we are successful. And the most amazing. You managed to record cubs walking with the released animals. So that is Cinderella 2.0, second generation. And we also know the politics is nothing to be taken light of. China can be unhappy. Fine. Yes, and finally we took note that there are lessons learned that include cooperation. In Indonesia, we have Forum Harimau Kita, which also support this, and the Indonesian culture is we are more cooperative in nature, I should think. So all your inputs will be combined with cultural approach that we have. And very briefly, also with Dr. Sanderson, it is also a reality that cities have to deal with nature conservation. I'm sorry, the tigers cannot get into the cities, but we have still to deal with the cities. And it is very nice that you highlighted population, poverty, and how to internalize. We have economic expert here, Pak Firsa, maybe he can, and Pak Dr. Sunario, maybe they can help us elaborate how to internalize. So what is striking that this is also a place for new ideas. Yours is also very positive because you said whatever happened, we only 9% of ecological footprint. So humans still have a chance, right? We have a younger generation that cannot make the same mistakes as us. All we can do is apologize and inform, but there is still time, I think. And you mentioned about municipal waste, electricity, and water. I cannot read even my own writing, so water is very important for all making a landscape approach. So really, we the participants are very much appreciated for your new ideas, namely for making the breakthrough like rewilding, how to transform urban to rural, and good governance. The city also needs good governance, of course, and how nature inspires people. I think that's all I can summarize. I'm sure that the participants can add much more. And we have about half an hour, right? Half an hour for discussion. So please, whatever your main interest, whether it is wildlife landscape or urban landscape, or preferably both, please give your comments and questions. We have half an hour, and please don't forget to mention your names and institution. The floor is yours. Okay? 1, 2, we have the leader for religious from Indonesia, Dr. Fahmi Manjaya. Yes, 1, 2, only 2? Oh, okay. 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, okay. For the first round, 4. Please from the right hand, the right side.
Okay.
Name and institution, please.
My name is Nurul from Department of Geography, University Indonesia. I have a question for Dr. Eric, Professor Eric. You mentioned about the human footprint, and then how the human footprint has changed from 93 to 2009 from your presentation. So I showed the the maps is like the change is more like the human footprint is more bigger in like a country with in the tropical countries. So he's moved to countries in the tropical area. Is for example Indonesia, one of them. So I just want to know your opinion about that. Is a good, is a positive or is negative for relative to the conservation? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That's a very good question. You want to do all this?
Can we just go around?
Okay, sure.
Can we quickly?
Okay,
In case
hold that.
we
Okay, I'll make a note.
Thank you. My name is Rudy from Universitas Nasional, Jakarta. I just like to ask Dr. Eric how much the sufficiency of human and nature habitat, how many percent? As the global they are targeting on achieve only 20% of the global target is will be have to be protected in 2020s. And our Indonesian constitution is that 30% of each city should be good for. If you establish a city, 30% of that is natural habitat, so it's really good. And I would like to know scientifically how much is sufficient for that. For Dr. Dale, is there any research on tigers in Sumatra and socialized tigers? I understand that in the wild they are not usually solitary animal, but I would like to ask if they are in Indonesia, they also make us like a community or socialized tigers. I also would like to understand what is your feeling when the tigers are in the China region, because we understand China will kill the animals that, as we understand, because they are some in the animals. And what is are you announced that to the public, so is the tigers is secure during your research? And because of that, this is huge, 100 kilometers. No people know, and you can follow day by day. It's amazing for us to understand. Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity. I'm Aula from IPB. I have a few questions. The first one is for Dr. Eric. Mr. Eric. Can you please elaborate about the gap, like you said about the bottleneck situation, and then we want to make the gap big enough to let the other species go through the breakthrough, right? So how we maintain the gap with all this extinction rate that is so high, especially in Indonesia, and all this urbanization will still need time, right? I mean, for the shift, the transition, it will need time. How we can maintain the gap, and what you mean with maintain the gap? Can you please elaborate further on this? And then for the tigers, can you please tell us about the conflict happens then and what the mitigation you do before releasing the tigers? Because for all I know, in Indonesia, it's really hard to release animals, whether it's tiger or even orangutan, because it's hard to find the suitable habitat for them, and it's hard to make understanding within the local society, local people there, that
they also need their habitat. And also I want to ask about how is the relations, how did you manage this transboundary release, because the tiger is moving forward, Russia and Chinese, and both countries have different policy, different different needs. Furthermore, there is incident happen that kills some livestock, so it must be hard. Can you please tell us further about that? Thank you. Okay, thank you for the time. I would like to say thank you for an interesting presentation for both of you, the speakers. And I would like to ask about the first presentation from Mr. Eric. Actually, I heard about the proverb is science without politics has no impact. Politics without science can be dangerous. Is it right? But according to our country, in political issue, especially in our governance, related to your presentation is about good governance. So I just thought, like, what's in your mind or your thoughts of this input about the corruption and then the resource management in our country? Thank you very much.
Okay, so thank you for all your very thoughtful questions. So to the question about the human footprint in the tropics, well, of course it's bad, right? You know, expanding the human footprint in the tropics are the most biodiverse regions of the world, so it puts more pressure on more species. But on the other hand, you know, all societies around the world are looking for development, right? And so, you know, sometimes in conservation we talk as if development could happen without some kind of impact on the environment, and I don't think that makes any sense. There's going to be some impact. It's really about balancing development and impact. And, you know, Indonesia is a country that's creating a lot of wealth, right? So the question really is then, what are you going to do with that wealth? And then how can you make sure that you conserve some areas so that your biodiversity can survive, and that therefore in the future that biodiversity can thrive and expand, right? So the human footprint isn't one direction. It can also, and one of the things I think that's important about our study is that it shows that human footprints can go up, but it can also go down, right? And it can go down while still maintaining the quality of life and the level of economic development for the people. So that's really what we need in this world, are win-win solutions. So I think the thing to think about is, you know, you're in a moment where the bottleneck is probably tightening in Indonesia on biodiversity. How can you make sure it doesn't squeeze all the way so that you lose the last of your tigers, for example, or your elephants, or the last of the rhinos here, for example? Yeah, does that make sense? And think about what is the future that you want, the future patterns of development, the patterns of the future human footprint that work for people and that work for the rest of nature. Okay, so there was also a question from the gentleman about sufficiency of how much land should we set aside in our cities for nature, right? I think that's what you were asking about. What's that? Farudi, is that your name? Yes, nice to meet you. So, you know, I don't know that there's any universal answer to that. And I wrote a book called Terra Nova, The New World After Oil, Cars, and Suburbs. It's a lot about city planning, city development. And there I suggest that cities don't need to have, you know, they don't need to have the density of, say, Manhattan, right? Midtown Manhattan. The density of about 20,000 people per square kilometer is sufficient to get the kind of economic activity and the support for public transportation and so forth that you need. So in my book, I suggest that you should develop the urban side for about that density, and then you should leave about half of the city for open space of one kind or another, which include parks, you know, for recreation and so forth, as well as natural areas in your city. You know, in some countries of the world, in some parts of the world, cities are actually where most of the nature is. If you go to Israel, for example, that small country, most of the nature is in the suburban areas, because outside of suburban areas, it's all converted to agriculture. In downtown, there's not very much nature, so the suburbia. Or in the state of Illinois in the United States, if you look at the map of biodiversity of Illinois, the place with the most biodiversity is Chicago. Because the rest of the state has become converted to corn and soybean agriculture, right? So, I think in the long term, what we should be looking for is the kind of thing that E.O. Wilson talks about, which is about 50% of the land, that's preserved for nature. Not right now, but in the long term, I think that's the kind of world, and that's the scientific base for that. I think that is the kind of thing we need to be looking for. And the last thing I'll say about this is that when we talk about setting aside land for nature in rural areas, I think that's mostly about conserving for nature. When we talk about setting aside land for nature in cities, that's really about the human relationship to nature, right? If you talk to most conservationists, if you talk to me or to Dale or conservationists on our WCS staff, and you ask, why do you care so much about nature? It's usually, almost always the answer will be because I had some experience as a child, right? In the environment where I grew up. So having they can be small, they don't have to be spectacular pieces of nature, but having nature that's close enough to where people live, so it can become part of their regular lives, their everyday lives, it's really important for fostering a conservation ethic for their entire lives. So I think for me, when I talk about the importance of nature in cities, it's really about preserving and conserving the human relationship to nature as much as it is about the nature itself, if that makes sense. Okay, I'm going to do my questions and then I'll give over to Dale to do his questions. Okay, so then over here, yes, the young woman, there was a question about the bottleneck and the gap. Okay, so the problem is that if we were to focus just on economic development and poverty alleviation, we might just squeeze that bottleneck too tight and nothing will survive, right? The tigers might not survive at all. But on the other hand, if we don't pay any attention to those things, if we maintain policies that allow poverty to increase and we don't support good urbanization, then the population will continue to go up. And that also will lead to the closing of the bottleneck. So we really have to pursue this sort of middle path that includes good urbanization and good nature conservation at the same time. Does that make sense? So how much is really the kind of thing that conservation expertise comes into. We talk about having like for a species, for example, maintaining populations so that they're self-sufficient, like Dale was talking about, so they don't go extinct. But then also having populations that are large enough and dense enough that they interact with the other species in the place, so that they're actually ecologically functional as well as being demographically functional. And then we talk about eventually having enough so that the human interactions with that species, whatever they are, whether it's tourism or culture or whatever, can also be satisfied. So we have to think about our conservation goals over the long term. The most basic one is just avoiding extinction. Because extinction is the end, right? Once you're extinct, you can't come back. So avoiding extinction, but that's just the beginning of the conversation. Then there are these other things we're looking for. So, and how much space, how big the areas have to be, all these things depend a lot on the particular ecologies of the species we're talking about. Tigers need more room than, some smaller cat species would, et cetera, et cetera. So, it's sort of a long conversation. I'd be happy to talk to you more about it. And then finally, good governance. So that's right, what does good governance mean? I speak about this mostly having spent a lot of time thinking about the history of New York City. And if you read the history of New York City, you realize that we couldn't have good sanitation in New York. We couldn't have good trash pickup. We couldn't have good transportation as long as there was corruption. New York City was a very corrupt government for a long time. In the 19th century, there was this thing called Tammany Hall, and they controlled all the power in the city. And there was a progressive movement at the end of the 19th century that broke the power of Tammany Hall. And once it broke the power of Tammany Hall, then we had investments in in urban sanitation, in urban nature, in our park system, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So as hard as it is to say, to actually have good nature conservation, you really have to have good governments. And what's most important about good governance is the people have to trust the government, right? Like if you look, you know, in sub-Saharan Africa right now, the sub-Saharan African cities don't perform very well because people don't trust the government, because the governments are very corrupt. And if you don't trust the government, then you don't pay your taxes, right? And so you have these large informal economies, and the government doesn't have the resources to do the things it needs to do. So, you know, the first step has to be getting your government in order. And that means trust, right? You have to trust that the government is going to make good choices on your behalf, and that they're transparent about them, that you can see why they're making the decisions they are, that there's data and there's not undue influence from outside actors, from the very wealthy or the very corrupt or whatever it is. And there has to be a democratic process where people are actually held to account for the decisions they make. So I don't know much about Indonesian politics, so I know you're about to have an election, but as you vote, these are the things I would encourage you to think about.
Dr. Henderson made a very interesting point about middle path, and Rudy is the expert for this middle path in Buddhism, middle path in Islam, so that we will all do the moderation. And just for information, Dr. Henderson, may I call you Dr. Eric? We are facing a general election, and that is a very good question. We have to select our public officials. We have to know their track record. Unfortunately, often it is just beautiful people, but no. Surya here is expert on legal. Maybe he can make some comments. But 17 April, we will face the election, and hopefully no one will become white group. And we exercise to fight against corruption. We have to make the selection and make the selection well. I'm sorry, this is sounding like a promotion, but yeah.
So I'm not going to talk about the elections. No comment. A couple of questions related to the Tigers.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bill. Dr. Bill spoke about traditional Chinese medicine, about tiger parts. It is very, very complicated because this is a traditional belief by some of the Chinese people. How can you educate them if it is their belief? We have experts like Pak Darmawan and Pak Uyung regarding TCM, maybe they will also contribute. But we have about, can we have about 20 more minutes? So we have 4 more questions. Okay, 20 more minutes. Okay. So if there is any more questions, we have 24 minutes, so maybe each person has at most 2 questions. It can be question, it can be comment, it can be bahasa Inggris, bahasa Indonesia. We will respond to anything from you. So 1, 2, I like these young people, I get the energy from afar. And then only 2? Oh, 3? 3? 1 more, please. Maybe from expert, other more. You have both TCM comment. No? Oh, okay, only 3. Are you sure? Okay, 4. All young people. Thank you so much.
Okay, my name is Sandra. I come from Biology Department of University of Indonesia. As a public lecturer, Okay, pretending I have no basic knowledge about the tiger. So my question is addressing to Professor Gale about the statement. The rehab does not need to be fancy, but should be well managed with the strict rule. What is the meaning of a good rule, the standard rule, or what? Just explain it to me. Thank you.
Can you say that? I didn't quite understand. Can you say that again?
Rehab, so the rehab does not need to be fancy. You start about it in the presentation, so I can imagine a rehab does not be fancy, but it shows well managed with strict rules. The strict rules. Can you explain it, please?
Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Vincent. I'm from biology courses in University. I want to ask to Dr. Dale first. In the rehabilitation that you and your team make, are there any kind of conflict between tigers in the early stage of the rehabilitation? If there was a conflict, what kind of solution have your team has done in the past? And for Dr. Eric, what if all urbanization that you said to move to urban area to make their life better, but the area for settlement are more limited in the urban area, but but in the settlement area for living in the urban area are more limited than in the rural area. What kind of suggestion do you think we should have done? And in some places, people can change for their behavior because they don't want to make a better impact in environment, but because of the impact of the politics that rule in our governments or in some leader of our government. What kind of suggestion do you think we can persuade them to make a better environment for the future? Thank you.
Yes. Thank you for the question. I'm from Indonesia. I would like to ask questions regarding the health theory that you mentioned, where we should conserve 50% of the nature. In this theory, I would like to know your opinion if this theory is applicable in international context or national context. Meanwhile, many countries are battling food security and many other things. And if this theory can, what's the opinion and how can we achieve in international frameworks or policies that maybe can work with that? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Eric Sinarmas and Dr. Gale for the insightful talks. My name is Aslan from the Biodiversity, Southeast Asian Center of Tropical Biology. I have a question for both of you. First, for Eric. In your footprint, I didn't see I don't know why, I think there is one missing point there. I don't know, it's carrying capacity. I don't know why not I was wondering why it's not involved that carrying capacity. You know, as we learn about the Malthus theory that, you know, about population growth, right? Is the food something? So I don't know, if not because that we are human tend to manage our life. For instance, like with technology, so it's nature, it's like we can manage our needs. I don't know why. I just wondering if you put their carrying capacity, then how is the graph look like? I don't know. So that's one. And second one for you is that on the map is a plan about that improving and reducing. Right? Improving means that less human footprint on that area, or that improving means that the green more. The forest is more there than before. I don't know. It's maybe you could explain for us what the improving means. I know if it's reducing, like intend to increase in the tropical area, people more go to the forest or something like that, and then our population is grow. Then, but in the other, like in the northern side, especially in Siberian area, is improving. So maybe I need to know what's the meaning of the legends of the maps. For Dr. Dales, this is just the question is about asking about your opinions, basically. As you know that Indonesia used to have like Sumatra, Javan tiger and then Bali tiger, right? So then technology, people now, like scientists right now in the world, they try to bring back what was back to life. For instance, like mammoth, something like that. We try to inject with the elephant and then to bring them back. So I don't know, maybe sometime in the future it will happen. I don't know. I mean, it's technology, because about nanotechnology and everything. Even the CRISPR technology, people they can do is create some super human. But what's your opinion? If this finally happens, do you agree? Let's say someday in the future the Javan tiger is bringing back and then reintroduced to Javan, or similarly to the Bali tiger. Just opinion, what's your opinion? About the cost and the pros, for instance. Thank you much. That's wrong.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you again. Hello? Okay, that's good. Okay, thank you again for your very thoughtful questions. I just want to say that when I give talks, I can always tell if I've done a good job if I get good questions back. And these are very good questions, so that makes me feel good about how I did. Anyway, thank you. So the first question here is about the politics, I think, of urban versus rural, right? So I think that's what you were trying to get at. So I don't know anything, again, about Indonesian politics, but I do know a lot about the U.S. politics. And that's the main reason why we have Donald Trump, right? Is because of certain rural people that voted for him. And why did that work in the U.S. political situation? It's because if you look at the way the U.S. government is set up, it values both the people voting and the land they're voting for, right? That we vote in states, and those state boundaries were determined 100 years ago or 200 years ago. So a little state like Delaware, has 2 senators, just like a big state like New York, et cetera, et cetera. And the point, I guess the point I'm trying to make is that we need to be evolving not only our economies, not only the way we manage our conservation, but also our politics for this new age. Then in many ways, the politics, say in the United States, the rules that we set apart were defined 200 years ago when George Washington was president. And 200 years ago, there were only 4 million people living in the United States. And only 2 million of them got to vote because half of them were enslaved, and then of those 2 million, 1 million of them were women, and they were not allowed to vote either. So it's only about 1 million people. And now there's 325 million people in the United States, right? So, you would think that the political system needs to evolve to reflect the new realities of the 21st century. And so, what that is something I think about all the time, and I don't have a good answer for you yet. But I think, we need to understand that, when you have these lines on these graphs that I show you, and they go up so steeply, that they have implications across all the systems of our lives. And some of those systems need to change. In many ways, we manage our economies and we manage our politics to solve problems of 100 years ago or 200 years ago, rather than to solve the problems of today. I don't know if that helps at all. In terms of this 50% goal that I talked about and E.O. Wilson talks about, and that's right, society has many competing demands. Food security, politics, cultural demands, as well as demands for nature, and how are we all going to work them out? And I guess my only point about this is that in a world where the population has come down, not because of revolution or because of war or because of terrible diseases or any of the awful, terrible, apocalyptic ideas that are out there, but because only through the natural processes of human life, and you have a world that has, I don't know, 8 billion people or 7 billion people or 6 billion people in it, and all those people, none of them are very poor, all of them have good lives, 80% of them live in cities. Well, that's a world where you could actually imagine having 50% of nature set aside. It's not right now, it's not right at this moment, but it's maybe 100 years from now. So then the question becomes for us, what are the things we need to do right now to make that future a possibility for our children and our grandchildren? Do you see what I'm saying? You know, most of society has been, you know, for many generations, people just focused on fulfilling their own needs now, right? And they kick the problems into the future, right? They kick the problems onto the poor because they had no power, into the future because future people can't talk, can't vote, and onto nature because nature can't talk and can't vote, right? But now we're getting to a point where there's enough development in society, not just in the developed world, but all across the world, in all the countries of the world, that we can make decisions thinking about the future in mind, where instead of making decisions that close down opportunities, we actually make decisions that open up opportunities for the future. I mean, why do universities exist? Right? Universities exist because they want to give to the future. That's why you're all here, because you want to learn things and give to the future. It's a public, you know, we talk about externalities in nature, or, you know, in conservation, the negative externalities, right? When we don't take in the cost. Well, there are also positive externalities, where we build things now to give to environments of the future. And so, you know, education is one of those. So, you know, more and more we need to be thinking about our politics in those terms. Aslan, you asked a very important question about carrying capacity, right? And of course, you know, 20 years ago, you know, there are all these books about what is the carrying capacity of the Earth, right? How much can you add? There's a famous demographer named Joel Cohen, and he has a book that's all about that reviews. And the estimates were all over the place, from like 1 billion people to 36 billion people, right? There was no agreement about it at all. And in my thinking about that, I actually think, actually in biology has led us a little bit astray, right? You know, when we think about carrying capacity in biology, we think about like logistic curves and you know, R versus K selection and these things. And those studies actually come from like flower beetles in vials of flour, right? You know, where you put in the flower, you know, you put in the beetles and the population grows and then it crashes because they pollute their environment. But the thing is, flower beetles are not a good model for people, because people can talk to each other and we make cognitive decisions. We cooperate, we can imagine the future. We're not just victims of our environment, we are active shapers of our environment. So I think, you know, actually the question of carrying capacity is a bit of a distraction, you know? I think it's better to think about what kind of world do we want to live in and how do we create that world, yeah? And for me, that includes making sure that we have enough nature that goes with us to support it, to make life not just possible for people, but meaningful for people, right? Because I see that as the highest human value, is not just taking care of ourselves, but taking care of our planet.
Thank you, Dr. Eric. Later on, I would like to ask you both, because we have not only senior people, but many students from biology, geography, and from IPB, Bogor Agriculture Institute, maybe forestry. So what is your three takeaway messages for the students in order for them to be successful in their career, namely to maintain sustainability, conservation, restoration, and so on? So what is your main three key takeaway messages? Good afternoon, Dr. Jill.
I'm not prepared for this, but first I would say get your education. Yeah, it's very important. It's the foundation for everything that you do in the future. Take it seriously and use the tools that you're being given right now.
So I would concur with all of those things. I think I would just add to be interested. So you know, we all live our lives and there's lots of things going on, and sometimes you feel that little tickle about, oh, that's really interesting. And when you hear that, you got to really be present to pay attention to that. Because that's what's going to lead you to new ideas. When you're curious about something, when it doesn't quite make sense, when it doesn't fit in, that's really the opportunity. And to reemphasize what Dale said, finding people that are curious like you is really important. It's not just you, but it's your friends and your family and the environment that you create around yourself. You know, human beings are social animals, right? And we evolved from other animals, and for a long time we lived in little small groups, little small communities. And so that's the environment that we work best in. And so as you go out into your careers, you need to actively work to build that environment around you to help make you successful and to be creative and clear-headed and also challenged, constantly challenging your thinking. I mean, that's one of the things I appreciate so much about my colleagues in WCS is we all share this common commitment to nature, and we come from some different perspectives, and we're constantly trying to make each other better, not to tear ourselves down, but to actually make the whole enterprise a success. And so try and find that in your lives, try and find that situation. And when you get to be older, when you start to grow a gray beard and so forth, then try and give that to younger people. Try and make an environment for them to succeed.
Thank you, Dr. Dale and Dr. Eric. So I also took note, important to get interested and then to cooperate. Right? And I would like to ask your willingness, maybe 2 or 3 minutes, for 3 final takeaways that I learned. And I'm sorry, each of us have our own learnings. This is just to share 3 points. The first, that we are in the age of crisis, right? You know the story of the frogs being boiled. They do not know, oh, it's getting hotter, and then finally they go away. That is the story of the frogs in the world. How much of the frogs have gone out? One third, or I do not know. But also the insects. We have Sasha here studying about insects underground, but suddenly they are gone. Our pollinators, our seed dispersals, slowly gone. Economic opportunity gone. So we are in this age of crisis. In this age of extinction, we have to deal with dichotomy, urban versus rural. But Dr. Eric Sanderson has just made it very clear that the dichotomy has to be faced with systematic changes. We are talking about changes. Likewise, Dr. Dale emphasized the need for action research. Not only research, no, but also action, and document the action systematically, so it also becomes a learning, an iterative learning process. And my final takeaway, at least for me, my final takeaway is that in this age of crisis, we need to be multidisciplinary, not only focusing in our own specialist field, no, but we have to learn about politics, we have to learn how to use the village funds. I just talked to Ibu Titi Setiawati. I'm very impressed that she's a forester, but now she's dealing with infrastructure in the cities. So that is quite a challenge, and I hope you will be successful and give us example. One day you will share your story. So So I would like to thank you very much in closing before I get to hand this to the MC, Dr. Del Miguel, Dr. Eric Sanderson, WCS Indonesia, Forum Harimau Kita, and Aisyah of Faculty of Mathematics and Sciences. Please expand our applause.
Thank you so much. Let's give a round of applause for our wonderful panel. And now I would like to ask Dr. Dale and Dr. Eric to choose the best questions that you get from the audience, and then they will have, we will give a little bit something to them. So the people who ask questions, can you stand up so Dr. Eric and Dr. Dale can see you? It's okay if you just stand up, the ones who ask questions. Yeah?
This is unfair. Sorry, I don't remember your names, of course. Well, I think the question about governance is very important. That was a good question. Thank you from you. Yep. I also like the question about carrying capacity. Thank you, Aslan, for that. That's very important. And this question about what is sufficient. Those are also very important questions. So thank you, sir. And, yeah. Oh, and, yes, thank you. Everybody clap. Yeah. But I also want to say that all the questions were very good, and I wasn't prepared to decide this. And I think the very best question goes to the question about good governance, because that's the most important. Thank you. I think both.
Okay. So please, you can go to the front to receive the gift.
Good job. Good work.
Okay, so just go up to the stage. Go to the stage. Eric, please give this Thank you. All of them. Dr. Dale, IDB. Great, thank you. So to close our event, we have a little token of appreciation for our speakers. And first, I would like to invite Pak Darmawan from Forum Harimau Kita to give a little token of appreciation to Dr. Dale. So please go to the stage. Pak Arman, you can go ahead and sit down. So I would like to invite Dr. Nurul Winarni from ICER to give a little token of appreciation for Dr. Eric. Dr. Nurul. So the last one is I would like to invite Pak Sunario to give a little something for Pak Didi. I would like to close our public lecture today. Thank you for coming here today to come see Dr. Dea and Dr. Eric. And please be careful on your way, and let's hope we meet again soon. Thank you very much.